Hello, friends. I am glad to see you again. Today I will tell you about the homeowners association that wants my warehouse to be shared. I woke up to a paper taped across my front door like a bad prank. The tape pulled so tight it made the wood flex if I tried to peel it off. In block letters, 2 sizes too large for common sense, the notice said I had 20 hours to move out of their neighborhood because I refused to share my warehouse. That was the word they used, share. Like I was hoarding cupcakes instead of welding rigs and a shelf of family heirlooms in a permitted accessory building behind my house. The letter went on to say I was not a cooperative neighbor, and that, effective immediately, I had to remove all personal belongings and surrender 70% of storage space for community needs. At the bottom it said, failure to comply will affect your residency status. Then 3 signatures, Margot, the HOA president, Levon, the compliance chair, and Bex, who described herself as Community Morale Officer, which was not a real board position so much as a personality. I laughed because the alternative was to go straight to yelling. I laughed so hard I had to lean on the doorframe while my dog, Pinto, stared up at me with the concerned eyebrows he gets when I seem broken. Then I stopped laughing because the dread sank in. I'm the one who actually reads the governing documents. I pay my dues on time, keep my grass under 8 inches, and put my trash cans behind the fence where they can't be seen from the street. I know the HOA does not actually own my house or the accessory building. I know they can't evict an owner, not without a court order for some very specific circumstances, none of which included does not loan us 70% of his storage for free. But I also know an HOA can make life miserable with fines, nasty letters, and escalations designed to squeeze out someone who doesn't bow fast enough. I took the paper inside and laid it next to my coffee mug, where condensation immediately started soaking the corner with the signatures. That made me feel better in a small way. I scanned the notice into a PDF, then photographed it with my phone from 3 different angles, because if I've learned anything in life, it's that good records are oxygen when people start playing games with rules. My warehouse, let me be clear about that word, is not a shipping hangar with forklifts and pallets. It's an accessory structure permitted by the city, 20 by 30 feet, insulated, and permitted to the rafters. I use it to store my work tools, a collection of old radios that belonged to my grandfather, camping gear, and, temporarily, a pallet of thermal panels for a friend whose installer had gone out of business mid-job. I run a small contracting business. I also fix my neighbor's screen doors and pressure wash sidewalks for free when a windstorm dumps dust all over. I'm not stingy with my hands. I'm just particular about what happens on my property. 2 months before the notice, Margot and Levon started a neighborhood resiliency initiative. On paper, it sounded fine. Emergency supplies, disaster planning, a focus on shared resources. In a meeting under the pergola at the park, where half the board wore matching polo shirts, Bex gave a pep talk about turning private waste into community benefit. I raised my hand. Do you mean donations? She smiled with all her teeth. Shared overflow, she said. We're asking for space, not stuff. Asking is one thing, demanding is another. The first demand came in the form of a survey slipped into mailboxes, asking who had extra attic corners, garages, or sheds. I wrote none. A week later, Levon was on my driveway with a clipboard. Hey man, he said as if we were old friends. He wore mirrored sunglasses that ate his face. We noticed your accessory structure. He said noticed like it was a blemish I'd tried to conceal. It's permitted, I said. Oh, for sure, great build, you did the slab right. Thing is, we're asking members to contribute 70% of available storage to the community cache. High need. We're prioritizing folks with non-essential items. He peered at the closed door like his eyes were a tape measure. You got golf clubs or tinsel, that type of thing? I told him no. He asked if he could take a look. I told him no again. He smiled in that thin way that doesn't include the eyes. We'll follow up, he said. They did, with a resolution passed at a meeting that conveniently forgot to list the resolution on the agenda. The text declared the board's authority to allocate underutilized storage for disaster readiness and mutual aid staging. A neighbor texted me a grainy photo of the resolution taped to the bulletin board by the pool. I emailed the board asking for a copy, minutes, and evidence of proper notice. Silence. I mailed a certified letter pointing to our CC and Rs section on board powers, which said they could adopt reasonable rules about common areas. My warehouse is on my lot. That's not a common area, any more than my bathroom is the community's washroom. I tried to be civil. I told them I'd be happy to donate money or even pick up lumber to help build a community shed in the greenbelt behind the tennis courts, which was actually owned by the association. Levon smiled like he was being patient with a toddler. "We're beyond that phase," he said. "It's about banding together. People who don't share aren't a fit." He used that word, fit, as if the neighborhood were a sweater, and I had to be tailored to suit these three. I went home and started pulling my documents into a folder labeled, "If They Try It." The day before the 20-hour notice, Pinto and I were in the warehouse sorting screws by size in a way that is soothing when you need control. I'd opened the big roll-up door to let light in. That's when Bex walked into the yard without knocking, holding her phone up like a badge. She was filming. "Hey there, followers," she said to the lens. "Just checking out a neighbor's space that would be perfect for the community cache. We're so excited to—" "You're trespassing," I said, loud enough that it made Pinto bark. Bex flinched, then squared herself like a host back from a commercial break. "We're inspecting for community compliance," she announced. "This is documentation. We're going to need about 70% of this, not including any hazardous materials, of course." She waved her hand toward my grandfather's radio shelf. "This, for example. Old radios? Not essential." I turned and hit the switch. The door rumbled down between us, cutting off the frame like a curtain. Her voice muffled into a string of self-righteous syllables. I latched the door and called the police. They were polite and slow because there was no emergency. By the time an officer cruised through, Bex was gone. I made the report anyway. Paper trail. Which brings us to the next morning. 20 hours to vacate. Surrender my storage. Remove my belongings and give them to them. The words were so bold they cast shadows on my kitchen table. I called my sister Liza because she has a voice that can make me untense my jaw when it gets tight. She listened without interrupting, then said, "Okay, you're about to do the thing you do. Make a plan, put your boots on, and write it down." So I wrote, Step 1, document everything. Step 2, send a demand for records under our state's Common Interest Community Statute, which gives owners the right to inspect financials, meeting notices, and minutes. Step 3, contact the City Code Enforcement Office to confirm my accessory structure's status and make sure no one's whispering that I built something illegal. Step 4, talk to neighbors who aren't enthralled by the polo shirt trio. Step 5, look up case law on HOAs trying to appropriate private property. There are cases. None are good for HOAs. My job takes me into older houses that have good bones and terrible maintenance habits. I have an affection for things that are sturdy underneath. The law is like that too sometimes. It has bones. You might have to scrape away rot, but once you find the studs, you can hang your case there. By noon, I had a PDF from the city confirming in official prose that my accessory structure had final inspection and was in compliance. I printed it and taped it inside the warehouse door like a talisman. I emailed the board a formal demand for records, copies of all meeting notices for the past 6 months, minutes, resolutions, and any correspondence related to the Resiliency Initiative. I cited the statute and gave them the deadline the law gives them. I also asked for the authority they claim to have to evict me. Then I called my neighbor June. She's the type who remembers your dog's birthday and knows which board members like the power too much. June laughed when I told her about the 20-hour deadline. "They put a notice on my door last month because I had a planter in my front bed that wasn't specifically in the approved color palette," she said. "The shades of dirt, I guess." June said she knew 4 people who'd had their fences measured with a tape measure that was suspiciously stuck at 6 feet when the limit was 7. "They think we won't push back," she said. "Some won't, but you will." I made a list of neighbors who might not be grateful for a forced loan of their basements. I started at the end of my street with a guy named Trip who restores bicycles and always waves with both hands. He invited me in, offered me a lemonade that tasted like actual lemons, and listened while I explained the notice. He showed me his email, a photo Bex had sent him of my warehouse taken from the Greenbelt, with a caption, "Ideal staging site." Tripp frowned. "That seems like an assumption," he said. "You're not doing this alone, right?" I told him my plan, including a recall election if the board was violating the open meeting rules or acting beyond their authority. He raised his eyebrows. "Spicy," he said. Then he nodded like a man who has decided to fix a chain instead of complaining about it. "I'll talk to a few folks," he said. At 4 in the afternoon, Levon showed up again. He didn't bother to ring. He stood outside the fence and called out, "We need to do a walkthrough." I went out and stayed on my side of the gate. Pinto sat next to me, tilting his head like he was trying to translate Levon's tone into a language where it would make sense. "No, you don't," I said. "You don't have any right to enter my property without my permission. If you think you do, put it in writing with the section of the documents that says so." Levon scratched a line on his clipboard. "This is going to escalate," he said like a prophecy. He gestured at the warehouse. "You've got 20 hours. I took out my phone, pointed it at him, and said, "Can you repeat that for the record?" He suddenly didn't like being filmed. He muttered something about community obligations and left without giving me the courtesy of stomping away to punctuate his departure. I had dinner with Pinto watching me like I was going to drop chicken on purpose. I wrote down my timeline and the list of people to call in the morning. I didn't sleep much. At 3 in the morning, I found myself in the warehouse, touching the cool metal of the radio shelf my grandfather had welded with hands steadier than mine. I thought of him telling me that you don't let bullies put their flags on your land. He used to say, if someone knocks on your door and claims your living room, you don't negotiate what corner they get. You close the door and call it what it is. He was not a man big on metaphors, but he was deliberate. At 9 a.m. on what would have been the deadline, I got a reply from Margot, which surprised me. She wrote, "Your refusal to cooperate has been noted," as if I had declined to wear a party hat. Under the Resiliency Initiative, the board has declared a state of ongoing emergency. The board has authority in emergencies. She attached the resolution. It was 3 paragraphs long and had a lot of exciting words like empower and authorize, and exactly 0 references to the CC and Rs. She also attached what she called a compliance schedule, which was a list of dates they expected to use my space for staging. At the bottom, failure to comply will result in fines and further action up to and including removal. I printed it and highlighted the removal on a fresh copy. I emailed back cordially, "Please provide the section of our CC and Rs or applicable statute that authorizes the board to commandeer an owner's private property or evict an owner. Also, please provide agendas and minutes for the meeting where the board discussed and adopted this resolution, along with a record of the vote." Then I called an attorney I'd used once when a subcontractor claimed my payment was late when it wasn't. Her name is Eden, and she sounds like someone who would declaw a dragon for you if you asked politely. I sent her the documents. She called me back in an hour. "They can't evict you," she said, the way a math teacher would say 2 + 2 is 4. "They can lien you for unpaid assessments, maybe fine you for actual violations, but they can't appropriate your structure. That resolution is theater. Also, if they're holding meetings without proper notice and adopting rules that affect owners without adopting them properly, that's a problem for them." I told her about Bex filming my yard and Levon trying to walk in, and she made a noise that translated roughly to, "Oh, come on." She said I should send a cease and desist letter for trespass and harassment, demand records again with a specific deadline, and prepare to file for injunctive relief if they tried anything physical. She told me to buy a couple of small cameras and point them at the warehouse and the side gate. "You're not going to need them, hopefully," she said, "but people behave better when they know they're being watched." I mounted 2 cameras, one under the eave and one inside the warehouse that caught the roll-up door and the main aisle. I set alerts on my phone. Pinto watched like he was learning a new job. That afternoon, June called me to say her teenage son had seen Bex and a couple of volunteers measuring the greenbelt and making a list of who has the biggest sheds. She also told me that Tristan, who had lived here longer than anyone and once served on a board that actually focused on budgets and landscaping instead of social engineering, had a binder of old minutes and was well known for keeping everything. I knocked on his door with a sprinkle bunt cake because if you want a man to share his paperwork, show up with carbs. Tristan ushered me into a living room arranged like the inside of a clock. Everything had a place. He rubbed the spine of the binder like a pet. "They're overreaching," he said without preamble. "We had a board try something like this years ago, except it was about mandating community babysitting. They wrote a policy that said anyone with a spare bedroom had to take turns hosting playdates. We reminded them that private homes aren't the associations to allocate." He let me scan his binders section on rule adoption procedures. It contained a checklist from a time when being on the board meant knowing the difference between a rule and a fantasy. You give notice, you put the proposed rule in the notice, you hold an open meeting, you record the vote, you publish the rule, and the rule can only regulate what the association actually governs, which is the common areas and the covenants. Nowhere did it say, pick a neighbor's barn like you're choosing a campsite. Tristan made tea. We signed a petition for a special meeting to recall the entire board. The petition language was simple: violation of open meeting laws, improper rulemaking, attempted appropriation of private property, harassment of owners. We needed a percentage of members to sign it. Tristan supplied draft language. June promised to go door to door because she knows every dog and, by extension, every person. Tripp said he'd print flyers reminding people they have the right to read minutes and to vote, and that a board that disrespects process will disrespect property. At 9 that night, my camera pinged. Pinto barked once, and I was up and looking at my phone. The feed showed 3 figures at my side gate, beams of flashlights playing like minnows. One voice was Bex's. "He's asleep," she whispered like I was a bear. "We're just taking a look." Someone jiggled the gate. The lock rattled. They pushed and found it held. "We can hop the fence," a more cautious voice said. Probably one of the volunteers, and I heard Bex say, "We're official." The cautious voice said, "No, we're not." I called the police again, and this time I said the word trespass enough times that the dispatcher took it seriously. I stepped onto my back porch with the porch light on and said, "You are trespassing. You need to leave. I am calling the police." They left, but slow, with that defiant stiffness of people who had expected to get away with something. 2 officers arrived in time to catch them walking out of the greenbelt, and I got to watch the officers say exactly the thing I'd been saying. Private property is private. They gave the group a stern talking to, and the officers' body cams added more documentation to the pile I was assembling like a cold campfire, patient, steady, and ready to spark. In the morning, I found an email from a person I didn't know who said he'd been asked by Bex to join the warehouse entry team and was uncomfortable. He attached a text screenshot that read, "If he won't give us access voluntarily, we need to inspect so we can itemize what can be moved. Legal will back us." I responded and thanked him. I've learned that when people go too far, someone in their camp will blink and tell the truth. Day 3 started with a letter from Eden on her quietly intimidating letterhead to the board. It used phrases like ultra-virus, beyond your powers, and irreparable harm. It laid out statute sections and case citations, and it ended with a very calm paragraph about injunctive relief, attorney's fees, and personal liability for torts committed by board members, like trespass and invasion of privacy. I printed that too, because it calmed me like chamomile tea. I also submitted a records request under the statute again, but this time I copied it to the association's management company. That's the entity that sends out our bills and coordinates landscapers. The manager, Roz, is not a zealot. She wrote back saying she'd be happy to set up a time for me to review records. She also copied the board, which felt like she was gently putting them on the right path. I replied with a list. Agendas for the last 6 meetings, minutes, the resiliency resolution, vote tallies, notices mailed to owners, and any communications authorizing entry onto private lots. I included a polite deadline. I kept my sentences short. That afternoon, I stood in my driveway talking to Tripp about brakes for ragged bikes when a car rolled to a stop a few houses down, and a man I didn't know got out. He walked like someone who already had a reason to be angry. He marched up to my fence and hooked his thumbs in his belt loops like a cheap sheriff. "You the guy who won't share the warehouse?" he said, skipping pleasantries. "My mom needs a place to store her medical supplies." He gestured toward the structure like he had been sent to speak for the general welfare. "My warehouse is not a medical facility," I said, keeping my voice steady. Pinto came up and leaned his shoulder against my shin, which did a lot to ground me. "If your mom needs help, there are resources," I added, because I am not without compassion. "But the association cannot compel me to donate space, and you can't come into my yard." He barked a short laugh. "This neighborhood is about helping each other," he said. "I voted for the initiative." I asked him where the initiative was published. He said Facebook in the same tone someone would use to say, "the law library." Tripp spoke before I could. "We have a process," he said, trying to keep it kind. The man did not care. "I hope they evict you," he said to me. "You're not a fit," that word again, slung like a stone. Tripp stepped forward like he was setting his own boundary on the line. "They can't evict owners," he said in a tone you use with small children near open flames. The man shook his head like we were stubborn bulls and drove away. I added that interaction to my notes under the category social pressure. I also added a different kind of entry, under unexpected allies. I got a call from a woman named Colette, who introduced herself as a nurse who lived 2 streets over. She'd heard about the warehouse situation through June's grapevine, and she wanted to make something clear. She had been asked to put her name on a flyer claiming that the community needed immediate storage of medical supplies in resident-owned structures. She declined. If we needed a supply cache, she said, we would do it properly, with climate control, inventory, chain of custody, and more. Not in someone's hobby space. She said the board had been using the idea of need to pressure people. That's not preparedness, she said. That's a power exercise. We picked a date for the petition table. Saturday morning near the park, where everyone walks their dogs, runs with strollers, or pretends to stretch while gossiping. We brought clipboards, iced coffee, and a bowl of dog treats. We were careful with our words because I wasn't interested in blowing up a neighborhood, just tightening the bolts. We explained the recall process calmly. We had a printed page with bullet points. Attempted appropriation of private property, violation of open meeting laws, harassment, and trespass. We explained that a recall doesn't dissolve the association. It replaces the board with people who will follow the rules they volunteered to uphold. Some folks signed like we'd handed them a pen they'd been waiting for. Others looked anxious and said they didn't want trouble. One guy said, "I got a violation letter for a non-complaint I never received," which was the sort of riddle HOAs can generate when they're sloppy. A woman told us Bex had filmed her backyard on a ladder to verify pool safety compliance, which made me write the words "invasion of privacy" on my notes in ink so hard it pressed through. By noon, we had enough signatures to require the special meeting. We delivered the petition to Roz at the management office because she had a stamp that made my heart rate slow when it landed on the date line. Received. She explained that the bylaws required the board to schedule the special meeting within a certain number of days. She said it neutrally, but the message was clear. There were rules. She knew them. That evening, I got a long email from Margot. It was 1,400 words that said essentially that I was selfish and the community was stronger than any one person, and that as president, she had the responsibility to make tough decisions for the good of all. She attached a photo of a pallet of water bottles and a stack of paper towels in her garage to show she was doing her part. She also attached a second notice, this one threatening fines of $100 per day for non-compliance with emergency storage policy. I breathed slowly through my teeth and drafted a response in a separate document because I was not going to feed that email with my immediate indignation. I waited an hour and then wrote back. "I appreciate your commitment to preparedness," I said, because it was true. "I share that goal. That's why I offered to donate funds and help build a proper community storage building on association property. However, you do not have authority to require owners to turn over private structures for association use. Your resolution is not supported by our governing documents or state law. Please see the attached letter from my counsel. Also, any attempt to fine me for non-compliance with an invalid rule will be contested and may subject the association to liability. Let's solve this through proper channels." I copied Roz, I copied Eden. Then I went out to the warehouse and did something that will sound like theatrics, but I promise it felt like sunscreen. I hung a laminated copy of the city's permit on the door next to a laminated card that had 3 sentences on it. Private property, no trespassing, violators will be prosecuted. It read like a cliché, but clichés are sometimes what you put up when the other side is making up its own language. The next day, the management office emailed me the minutes I'd requested. 2 months of minutes were missing. The ones provided showed no discussion of a resiliency resolution. The agendas sent to owners contained no mention of a vote on storage allocation or anything like it. The resolution itself had been drafted and voted on in what was described in an email as an executive session. That was the wrong kind of meeting for making rules that affect owners. Executive sessions are for things like legal advice, owner discipline, and personnel issues. I highlighted the parts that mattered. I made a separate document of procedural defects that could be read by someone in 10 minutes and understood in 5. I wasn't trying to be dramatic, I was trying to be methodical. When people are loud, the quiet facts become anchors. With the special meeting clock ticking, Bex posted a video in the community Facebook group that made me wince for the secondhand embarrassment, if not for the effects. She called me "that guy hoarding space while others suffer," and implied that my warehouse was full of party decorations and antique furniture. She blurred my street number in a way that only drew attention to it. A dozen comments were supportive. A dozen more said some version of "this isn't how this works." Tristan, who I'd learned had a baritone voice that could soothe a nervous cat, posted the section of the CC and Rs that said private lots and structures are not subject to association rules beyond what's in the recorded restrictions. He didn't mention me by name. The next morning, I found chalk writing on the strip of public sidewalk in front of my house, "Share your space," which would have been whimsical if it hadn't been accompanied by a box of moldy winter boots left on my driveway with a sticky note. "These can go on your shelves." I took photos, then I moved the box to the curb with a sign that said, "Free boots. Take them to a warmer home." Pinto sniffed them like he suspected they were part of a puzzle. Eden filed a complaint in court for injunctive relief with a request for a temporary restraining order prohibiting the association and its agents from entering my property, attempting to enforce the storage resolution against me, or otherwise harassing me about my warehouse. She told me to be prepared for a hearing in about a week. I made a file folder for court and did the thing that calms me. I swept the warehouse floor from the back to the front, tight lines like mowing a ball field, and I put all my hand tools in order by handle length. The day of the special meeting arrived with a sky that looked like someone had primed it for paint. Flat, waiting. We gathered in the community room by the pool. There were more folding chairs than the lonely budget meetings ever drew. Roz sat at a table with a stack of envelopes, the agenda, and a steady expression I grew to respect deeply. Margot wore her polo shirt and had on a necklace that was so heavy it looked like a full-time job. Levon had his clipboard. Bex had her phone on a little tripod aimed at herself. The three of them took their spots like anchor points. Tristan sat near the front like a lighthouse. The meeting went off-book in the first 5 minutes when someone requested to add an agenda item. Board explanation of resiliency initiative. After some sputtering about procedure, they relented. Perhaps because Roz cleared her throat in that delicate way that says, "You're in a room with rules and adults." June spoke first. She described the initiative's goals and then asked the obvious question: why had the board adopted a resolution that claimed emergency powers to take private property without notice, discussion, or authority? Margot said words like spirit of community and urgency, and we can't always talk everything to death. A man in the back raised his hand and asked, "What is the emergency? Did something happen I missed?" Levon said, "Emergencies don't announce themselves," which is true but not helpful. Then Beck said, "We need to move fast when people resist," and you could feel the room's temperature drop 6 degrees. I watched faces change. People who were uncertain straightened like their chairs had gained a new rung of back support. Tripp asked the board to read aloud the section of the CC and Rs that authorized the association to allocate owner storage. Levon said, "It's complicated." Tristan stood and read the actual section, the one that said rules must be reasonable, uniformly applied, and limited to matters of common area and harmonious appearance. He read it like it was scripture in a church committed to geometry. Then he read the open meeting requirements. He did not raise his voice. He did not call anyone names. When he sat down, it was like he'd placed a brick in the floor. We voted on the recall. People filed past the table with their envelopes. Roz counted with her assistant, whispering numbers that added up to something that felt like a turn in a story. When they finished, she stood and announced the result. The board was recalled. There was a cheer, but not the mean kind, more like a relief laugh that had been waiting at the border. We elected a new interim board. Tristan, a woman named Poppy who works in logistics and has the face of someone who can get things actually done, and a retired firefighter named Orlando. The new board said they would review the resiliency initiative and do it properly, with volunteers, donations, and an actual plan for a storage building on the association's property if the membership wanted it and if the budget allowed. They said they would not be using private property without the owner's written consent because, to paraphrase Orlando, we all learned about private property in 4th grade. After the recall meeting, the air felt lighter. Margot swept out like a storm cloud. Levon hugged his clipboard as if lamination were armor. Bex posted a haters story and then marched to my fence to declare I'd ruined everything. Pinto growled, rare for him. I kept my voice even. "Do not come on my property again." She shot back, "Make me." I pointed at the camera. 2 days later, a process server delivered relief in dry font. Court date set, temporary restraining order granted. It barred the association from stepping on my land or enforcing the storage scheme while the case moved. The new board's counsel stipulated to make it permanent, clarifying boundaries. Polite lawyer for never again. If it ended there, tidy bow. But my grandfather's notebook has a note beside a radio switch. Check the side effects. The recall exposed the fiction behind the initiative. Donations labeled emergency fund had been dumped into the general account. Not theft, sloppy. The new board ordered an audit. It found consulting invoices to a marketing friend of Bex's, receipts for matching polos, and a payment to Levon's cousin, an emergency storage consultant, who wanted fees for inspecting private sheds, no felonies, plenty of trust erosion. At a special meeting, the board laid out the numbers without theater and proposed fixes. Follow the documents, budget with clarity, vote on anything that affects owners beyond common areas. Build a storage building on association land only if volunteers raised funds and members approved. They also recommended censure of the prior board for open meeting violations and overreach. The vote carried. Consequences rippled. Levon resigned from another board. Bex shuttered her feeds after parents objected to filming at the pool. Margot wrote that she only wanted what was best. No apology. We didn't need confession, only closure. A month later, the new board held a real meeting about a real plan. Colette, a nurse, advised on inventory. Orlando, a retired firefighter, led training. I pledged money and weekend labor for the slab. My warehouse stayed mine. The radios hummed. Pinto found his sun patch. Then a card arrived with a flashlight doodle. Thank you for standing up. I signed up to help and it felt wrong. I'm learning the rules now. I set it beside my grandfather's badge. Fix what you can. Associations are fine when they stick to paint, pools, and budgets. They're contracts around grass, not governments. They can't commandeer your garage or evict you for guarding your shelves. Life tried to normalize. Then the association's insurer requested a loss control review. Translation: some prior acts might sit outside indemnification if willful. The carrier's rep said insurance covers risks, not adventures like hopping fences with flashlights. Eden, my attorney, suggested we close the case. Permanent injunction, rule-making policy, rescission of the storage resolution, and my public support for the proper storage building, plus a small claims consent judgment against the trespassers. Before it finalized, Bex posted a late-night edit of my warehouse about selfish neighbors. Eden sent a letter citing privacy law and our nuisance clause, copied the platform, and set a deadline. By lunch, the video vanished. By dinner, Bex posted a flowered text square. The comment that mattered read, "The rules apply to everyone." We filed small claims for trespass and nuisance against Bex and Levon, attaching police logs, camera stills, and the entry team text. Court was a circle of chairs and a judge. Bex tried community authority. The judge raised a hand. Your association cannot grant you a right to enter a private residence. Judgment for me, damages, costs, and a no-contact order. Meanwhile, the board met the city planner. We poured the association slab on a gray Saturday. Orlando said, "You can't command people into community. You build it with days like this." The audit's money threads were tied off. The marketing friend returned her check. The cousins settled and agreed not to solicit work again. A bylaw amendment added a training requirement for board service. When a summer storm knocked out power for 4 hours, the new building proved itself. Solar light, lanterns checked out, wellness checks done. No one at my fence. Pinto snored like distant radio static that night, softly. Months slipped into the good ordinary. Policies got stamped adopted. Poppy chaired committees that save money. Orlando taught kids to find the gas shutoff. One Tuesday, Bex knocked, 3 respectful taps holding bread and jam. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm learning." I took the bag. Pinto thumped his tail. I keep the original 20-hour notice in a sleeve labeled warehouse. Keep. I look at it to remember that absurdity only wins if you let it set the pace. The warehouse is a building again. The emergency storage is a building again. Between them is a path we made on purpose. Fix what you can, light what you can, close the door when you need to so you can open it when you want to. That's how this ends. Not with me giving up 70% of anything, but with all of us giving 100% to the right things in the right way with the right fences. Friends, thank you. See you soon.